In today's video, I will be giving you an introduction into medieval cooking for the common peasant, with the most famous of all meals from the Middle Ages, pottage. I've sourced some simple ingredients which were regularly being consumed during the medieval period, and while I show you my step-by-step guide of how to make authentic medieval pottage, I'll be giving you a brief history into medieval cooking and agriculture. Firstly, let's begin with the ingredients. Cabbages have been grown for thousands of years and were most likely brought over to England by the Romans from mainland Europe in around the 1st century AD. By the Middle Ages, cabbage was a staple vegetable for all levels of medieval society, commonly featuring in meals for the noble classes as well as lowly peasants. Onions were also assumed to have been brought over by the Romans, along with leeks, which I will also be using. Carrots are believed to originally come from Persia, and were known to both the Greeks and the Romans. It is thought that carrots were also a gift from Roman occupation in Britain, but were considered much more of a delicacy than they are today. Carrots were also a variety of colours such as purple, red, white and even black. By the 10th century, carrots were being grown more commonly in Saxon England and were also considered a staple foodstuff by the time of the Norman conquest. Peas were one of the most common and abundant of all agricultural foodstuffs, being farmed from as early back to the Neolithic period and being in constant demand ever since. They were a reliable food in times of famine and were a staple for pottage as they could easily be boiled and broken down into a stew. Lentils were another staple introduced by the Romans and provided a meaty, filling alternative when meats or poultry was not ready available. Speaking of meat, I opted to use pork as this was the most common meat eaten by peasants during the Middle Ages. Indeed, it is believed that most households would keep a pig, feeding it scraps and leftovers until the winter arrived. Then the pig would be slaughtered and the meat could be smoked or salted to preserve it over the winter when food was harder to come by. Chickens were rarely eaten for their meat during the medieval period, as they were considered much more valuable to keep for their eggs, which was a reliable and repeatable food source. Chickens were also cheap and easy to feed and keep. However, they were a common target for foxes and wolves that would raid local villages. Sometimes these opportunist hunters would invade settlements so regularly that an official job role during the Middle Ages was a wolf warden, who would be in charge of patrolling the village at night with a crossbow, bow and arrow or spear to fend off any unwanted beasts. It is thought that many local folklore of dark beasts and werewolf-like creatures stemmed from stories of wolf wardens. Now that we have all the ingredients chopped up and ready, we boil enough water to fill half a saucepan. People in the Middle Ages did not measure ingredients like we do today, instead they relied on measuring by eye. Now put the cabbage, carrots and leeks in the water and leave to boil for approximately 30 minutes on a medium heat. We put these 3 vegetables in first as they are tougher so they take longer to break down. After you've salted the pork, place in the oven for 20 minutes until the meat is cooked and slightly charred on the edges. The rest of the stew will be fairly mushy so the toughness of the meat will be a welcome change of texture. Once the vegetables have had time to break down a little, add the salted pork, onions, lentils and peas and stir to get an even mixture. We will now put the lid back on the saucepan and leave to cook on a medium-low heat for approximately 2 hours until the ingredients have broken down into a meaty broth. You may want to check back every half an hour to top up with boiling water. While we wait, let's go over some history of food and agriculture during the medieval period. Organised agriculture began in Western Europe in around 4000 BC, when humans moved from a nomadic hunter-gatherer way of living to a more settled, semi-permanent lifestyle, something that came possible after the thawing of the last ice age. Agriculture had been around in other places on Earth for much longer due to a warmer, more stable climate. The Bronze Age allowed for much more efficient agriculture due to the invention of bronze tools which made the necessary jobs surrounding farming much more efficient. Bronze hatchets, scythes and threshers were all helping to pave the way for a much more agriculturally dependent future in Britain. During the Iron Age, agricultural methods had become much more refined, and a plethora of new foods were introduced to the native Britannic people through expanding trade and, of course, the Roman invasion. Skipping forward to the Norman occupancy of Britain, and by the time of the Domesday Book in the late 11th century, it is believed that around 75% of all land in England was being used for agricultural means. An estimated 1 million people were living in England during this time, all relying primarily on grains, vegetables and fish to make up the majority of their diet. Since most vegetables tend to be quite tough, boiling them into a stew was a much more efficient way to easily making a meal for the whole family. Pottage is an umbrella term for pretty much any meal cooked primarily in a pot. Typically, a number of raw ingredients would be thrown together in an iron pot or cauldron and cooked in boiling water, being turned into a thin broth, a soup or a thick stew. Meats were often added and the pottage was served in a bowl, often with a side of cheese, butter and bread. Of course, peasants would be eating brown bread, as white bread was the result of taking much more time to grind the grain into refined white powder, something that the common folk simply did not have time for, as the daily grind would often take up an hour of a peasant's day. During the Middle Ages, peasants would make their own bread if they owned a bread oven. However, every hamlet, village or town would have at least one local bakery, and it was tradition in England for the baker to leave their oven on during Sundays, so that the local community may use it to bake their weekly batch of bread for free. Water was a common drink during the medieval period, as the people knew that boiling water would get rid of anything nasty, so would be safe to drink once cooled down again. A popular drink to accompany a hearty bowl of porridge would be a dark ale. Not beer, since beer as we know it today would have not been invented yet, and was a 16th century invention over in mainland Europe. Dark hoppy ales were a preferred beverage for the English, and often had a hint of sour taste to them. The shelf life of ale was also very short, only lasting around 48 hours before beginning to turn. Due to this, taverns and breweries only sold ales to the public on certain days to ensure a high demand and low wastage. To indicate that a new batch was ready to be served, these establishments would raise a flag or banner over the entrance door, something that continues as a tradition over 800 years later. One of the best perks to pottage is that, just like any stew, the taste improves over several days as the vegetables begin to break down further, releasing more and more flavour with each day. So, take a well-deserved break from toiling in the fields, ladle yourself a bowlful of pottage, and enjoy. But for now, thanks for watching.